Hi, everybody. So I think we can start with a presentation from Professor Raghu Raghavan, Professor of Mental Health at the Montfort University.
Thank you for this opportunity to present at this vibrant conference on heritage and sustainable future. My presentation is on cultural heritage, mental health and well-being, idioms of distress, and eudaimonic idioms. Mental health and well-being is a topic of everyday discussion because of the pandemic and also its effect on our health and well-being. So how does culture and heritage affect mental health and well-being? Cultural heritage does not end at monuments and collection of objects. It also includes traditions or living expressions inherited from our ancestors and passed on to descendants, such as oral traditions, performing arts, social practices, rituals, festive events, knowledge and practices concerning nature and the universe. So in my presentation, I will be focusing on two GCRF projects that's based in India on mental health and resilience, and also on mental health and literacy in urban and rural communities, using both creative arts and medium as means of methodology for narrating mental health, idioms of distress, and eudaimonic idioms. So how does mental health and well-being connect with cultural heritage? Mental health is central to well-being. The World Health Organization also says that there is no health without mental health, and gives mental health great importance in promoting our health and well-being. Well-being is actually a positive construct that incorporates two related ideas. Firstly, the subjective satisfaction with life and positive effect or mood. And secondly, the meaningful function and human development, which is normally called the Aristotle's eudaimonic tradition. Mental illness actually makes about 15% of the total disease conditions around the world. So what is mental health? Because there is an essential difference between what is mental health and what is mental illness. Mental health actually means our ability to create self-awareness, positive thinking, our ability to recognize stress and strain in our daily lives, and our ability to manage it well. Many people talk about coping with stress and strain. It is just more than coping. Mental health is about effective and good management of our positive and negative thoughts, emotions, and our behavior. So why is mental health important? Good mental health actually helps us to create our inner strength and capacity in ourselves to create that self-awareness, understanding and the abilities to withstand stress, and all the negativity that actually affects us. And not just our personal lives, but in our family, work, and social life as well for sustainable living. So good mental health is not all about feeling happy and confident 100% at all times and ignoring all the problems and difficulties in our daily lives. It is about living well and having the ability to manage these problems and difficulties. Our cultural upbringing and societal norms, spirituality, belief systems, traditions, all of these actually affect the way we actually seek help for mental health and support each other for well-being. So our cultural heritage shapes the way we think, as it plays a major role in how we think about mental health, well-being, and also about mental illness. So this is actually from a project on mental health and resilience in India, in Pune in India. It looks at how do people from marginalized communities create resilience for mental health and well-being in the midst of adversities. Normally, everybody, all professionals and researchers in mental health are so keen in actually looking at the prevalence of mental health as opposed to looking at resilience of communities. So we used theater, music, dance, and painting, and many of other activities to actually work with communities to understand the perspectives on mental health and resilience. So in our study, we found people sometimes have particular ways of expressing what is important in sustaining them over the course of their own migration journey and life course. By analogy, with the well-known idea of idioms of distress, it is also possible to speak of eudaimonic idioms in which people express ideas about what they find conducive to happiness or well-being. These do not always map to nearly the Western-derived questionnaire measures on resilience. From this standpoint, we can understand people's own constructions of resilience, and the more likely it will be that the resilience-promoting interventions can build successfully on the specific aspects of resilience most relevant to health outcomes as defined by people in particular cultural context. So the appearance of the concept of resilience in health can be viewed as a part of a paradigm shift from pathological focus to the positive aspect, and then growing the recognition that focusing too much on pathology may predispose an over-reliance on prescriptive, expert-driven interventions. Researchers often say that interventions that are based on deficits, problems, or pathologies of individuals tend to direct attention of professionals to only one view of the person. The emphasis on deficits, on what a person is lacking, leads to a cycle of focusing only on what needs to be repaired, followed by reliance on prescribed resources and assumed solutions. This is not a holistic way of actually looking at an individual. This is not actually a strength-based model of actually working towards resilience and mental health. And this is actually based on our work in Kerala, in southern India, a temple town called Chottanikara in Kerala. This temple is actually associated with curing mental illness and is still active in traditional healing practices. The healing practice includes chanting of mantras, prayers, and the main temple. At this temple, during the evenings, there is a ritual named Gurudi Puja, great sacrifice, which is the main practice of curing mental illness by warding off evil spirit from affected person's body. The ritual ends by the affected person hitting a nail on a tree nearby the temple. So culture actually affects the ways in which we actually seek help and also talk about mental health. Every culture has a different way of actually looking at mental health. For many, there is a growing stigma around mental health, and mental health challenges are considered a weakness and something to hide. This can make it harder for those struggling to talk openly about and seek help. Culture can also influence how people describe and feel about their symptoms. It can affect whether someone chooses to recognize and talk about their physical symptoms, only emotional symptoms, or both. Cultural factors can also determine how much support someone gets from their family and community when it comes to mental health. Because of existing stigma, minorities are sometimes left to find mental health treatments and support alone with real difficulties. When looking for mental health treatment, we need to talk to someone who understands with specific experiences and concerns. It can sometimes be difficult or time-consuming to find resources and treatment options that take into account specific cultural factors and needs. Next, I'm going to actually show you how we use theater as a medium in terms of engaging with the communities in the state of Kerala on mental health literacy. next one is in relation to working with tribal communities in a tribal land in Kerala, and this is how we have actually used theatre as a medium in working with the tribal dance groups. So mental health is actually a global public good and is relevant to sustainable development of all countries, regardless of their socioeconomic status. Because all countries can be thought of as developing countries in the context of mental health. True, but a word about the politics of mental health. Despite the cultural narratives, modern knowledge about mental health, public attitudes remain seriously prejudiced against people with mental illness, and political decisions reflect these attitudes. It is time that we change. It is high time that we decolonized mental health care. We have the cultural heritage, healing practices, meanings and connection with communities for culturally affiliated practices especially for sustainable living and development. It is time that the global North actually looked at global South practices rather than attempting to medicalize the whole aspect of mental health on the global South. Decolonizing mental health systems allows communities to decide what is considered suffering rather than the system and the global health deciding for them. This is more about co-creation and co-production of knowledge from the community. There's an Eastern saying, from the Indian scriptures, it actually says, Loka samasta sukhino bhavantu. May all beings everywhere be happy and free. We call about universalism in terms of sustainability and living for mental health and well-being. Thank you, and namaste.
Thank you, Raghu. I know, I don't know about everyone else, but I find that really fascinating. I actually got goosebumps when you were playing the video. So definitely made an impression. So thank you.
Thank you.
I think with that, we're going to move straight on to the next presentation. And I do believe that is Karina and Adrian. So would you like to take the Zoom stage when you can?
Yes, so I will jump in with a short introduction for Karina and Adrian. So Karina Krucher is senior lecturer in archaeology at the University of Bradford, and Dr. Adrian Evans is also lecturer in archaeology and forensic science at the University of Lections. Thank you very much for your presentations. I'm very looking forward to it.
Thank you. Hi. Oh, Adrian, are you there? I think this is the test session, isn't it?
Yes. What a bit of a meltdown
between technology.
Camera for a second there. Yeah. I'm just going to get my PowerPoint up and running. Hopefully.
So in the meantime, I think this is a good point just to remind everyone that if you have any questions at all that you want to ask our fabulous panelists, then please do put them in the Q&A chat, the chat for the Q&A at the end of the presentations, and we'll be happy to ask them for you.
Okay, thank you. So as a provocation, what we've got here is some of the work we've been doing at Bradford. Now, we're not mental health specialists, I'm an archaeologist. I'm a digital heritage specialist, and so we've come at this from a slightly different angle and approach, seeing what we can do with research outcomes to have a broader impact in the work that we've been doing. And so there's a couple of case studies that we can talk about, and Karina's got more work than me in this subject, but of relevance is the BREEVE project that we've been doing for a couple of years now. And the BREEVE stands for Building Resilience Through Heritage, which is a contraction of our project title, which actually includes resilience, well-being, and cohesion in displaced societies using digital heritage. So I'm going to focus on cohesion as an important factor in this, and how that impacts obviously on mental health. Now, I said that we're archaeologists. I come from a digital heritage background, working in Jordan on archaeological sites, and it's whilst they're doing things with 3D scanners and capturing objects and capturing sites, that I recognised the Azraq refugee camp and wondered how we might use heritage, given that we were living in that region, if there was anything that we could do with the stuff that we do to have some sort of positive impact on the people that live inside the camp. Now, Azraq camp, it was an unmissable place whilst out there, because to get anywhere in eastern Jordan, you've got to drive past this huge place. It houses nearly 40,000 refugees, and they've come from Syria. They're from all over in Syria, and it's a place where, because of that, they're from these different regions, so the bigger towns that you might have heard of, Aleppo and Homs and Damascus, and they're crammed into these spaces. And in particular, in Azraq camp, we thought this would be an interesting case study location, and we're guided here by colleagues. So this is a project that's sort of co-led with Karina and Owen Green and Andy Wilson. Owen Green is our sort of resident international development expert, and he fed us towards Mercy Corps and working in these camps because of the situations that occur there due to low personal security and whatnot. In Azraq camp itself, there is a place called Village 5, which is the high security camp. So it's effectively a prison within a prison. And in this place, you've got, at one point in time, no electricity, limited access to resources, limited access to any social activities, because people aren't allowed to leave. And you've got this boiling pot of people from different places where small details in culture can add up to, can build up within people and cause violence, lots of personal security problems. So it was a place where we thought it would be a good location to test the idea of using digital heritage in a way to build cohesion and improve personal resilience, all these nice things. To do that, so that was the idea. Using heritage, can it work well to have a positive impact on individuals, have a positive impact on a group community, and in particular, testing the use of digital heritage. And I mentioned that specifically because the idea was that if we can use the sort of fanciest parts of the toolkits that we've currently got in cutting-edge research within archaeology, that might be something that captures the attention of an audience, so it can draw more people to participate. Higher participation numbers has an impact on greater outcomes from the work that you do. And I don't need to replicate some of the things that Raghu was just saying about what we mean by cultural heritage, but there's a whole melting pot of interesting things, some of which just gets lost within the camps. The children that are in there have either come in very young and have got limited cultural memory, or limited cultural memory that they'll talk about, or they've been born in a camp and don't really have any of that, and can only get that from the surroundings, and they're surrounded by a prison. So it's not a very rich place for building up that part of one's persona. The digital heritage angle that we went with in the camp has been the use of virtual reality. And it's about co-creation. So we've gone into the camp here and presented the idea of using virtual reality, and with the concept of being able to revisit or take people to those places that they've not been to, that you want to share with them, and bring people from different parts of the sort of cliques within society in the camp together and share those different experiences, and through that form some sort of mutual understanding. So we'd create places around Syria in virtual reality for people to visit, and we'd ask the people in the communities there what it is that they want to share, because there's no point, obviously, there's no point in taking things that we think that are valuable. For it to have real impact, you've got to have this element of co-creation. That's what we felt from the work, and so that's how we went about this. I've got a small video showing that process here. Hopefully the audio works.
So we took and created renderings of places in Syria. This is the Temple of Bel, and what this allows is, in virtual reality, as you can see here, people to wander around these environments and really fully interact with them. And that allows somebody to become immersed, and it starts this recollection process.
هي مش موجودة؟
لا هي ما هي موجودة، كانت بالزاوية.
There was a tree.
There in the corner.
Maybe in the other corner, and this is why there's no.
جربي روحي كمان إنه غيري هاي يمكن تلاقي الشجرة مرة ثانية.
لا كانت بالزاوية هاي.
Okay.
It was there.
وكان كان بكرسيين الفتحة هاي مفتوحة، كان بكرسيين مقابل بعض.
Cheers.
هاي شيء كنت أتعشى كل أسبوع عندها.
Oh my God.
والله أنا وزوجي كنا عرسان
she used to have dinner there like every time she last year. إذا يا جماعة بضايق الموضوع من وقفه.
لا عادي.
كيف؟
فيطلعوا الجمعيات الغربية ترى كنت
She said she remembered.
So what you were seeing there is the process of this one of our community members using the VR and revisiting a place that she used to go to for lunch with her husband, and relaying those memories to her friends around her who didn't realize that, you know, where she was really from, and going through a whole roller coaster of emotions through the process. And it ends with her being fairly upset, but as a small segment of the whole experience, that's not how it actually ends, of course. So she ended up wanting to come back into virtual reality to re-experience this in a more positive light, having gone through a full consideration of the entire process and spoken with the other people in the camp, and it's part of a recovery, part of the recovery mechanism. And we went through this in the camp in a series of different workshops, looking at different age groups and gender, and finding out particular places that we'd like to recreate in VR and have people visit, and starting to bring into this all the other nice things that come with heritage, because the VR is a good entry point, and it gets mass interest, particularly from the youth, of course. They wouldn't normally want to come to this sort of event. And then you can bring into this food, other types of imagery, and dance, storytelling, you name it. And we ended up creating a cultural festival that people would come to attend and see the VR and all those nice things, and start sharing stuff within that community rather than staying within enclosed groups. So yeah, we had a nice intercultural event as part of the process of trying to build cohesion within the community, and I think that's been relatively successful as a methodology in improving the quality of life of these people. And I'd like to hand over to Karina, who's going to go into some further detail on that.
Thank you. We got the next slide, Adrian.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, so you might wonder how we came about to do this as archaeologists, and it's just to highlight that, as Adrian mentioned, we didn't come at this from the perspective of being mental health perspectives. I previously run a project in Bradford which used the past to prompt an open dialogue around difficult conversations. In this case, it was around death and bereavement. And we took some of the lessons from that project to embed into the Breathe project. And that was the importance of creating a safe space for people and then providing prompts which then opened up dialogue to difficult conversation. So it was creating a safe and supported space. So when we ran the events in the camp and in the town, they were always with our partners, Mercy Corps, who were trained specialists for all of that support, and it was embedded in a wider programme. But then the heritage or the archaeology then sparks and opens up the conversation. It gives space for the dialogue, and it just breaks down some of the barriers. Can we have a next slide, Adrian? So when thinking about some emergent themes for the Breathe project, we're beginning to really see the benefits on the ground in several areas. One was around the benefits to our participants around intergenerational links and families. So the kids coming home after experiencing the VR and asking about their origins. Another was really about those social cohesions and about, we saw very quickly that the networks that were formed through the Cultural Heritage Festival lasted long beyond our project. When we went back later, they were talking about new families they felt like new families had been formed across the camp. And it was not just through the virtual reality, but things like food and music and dance, and this created the sharing of recipes and stories. That was just really empowering. And then thinking about the importance of memory. So one participant said that she'd been trying to forget her heritage, but she realised that actually it was important to who she was and she wanted to bring that back. But what we would like to do is actually go further with evaluation. I'm really looking forward to tomorrow's session, specifically on evaluation, because really we'd like to tap into some metrics to gain a wider picture of how this works. And finally, we've got the next slide, Adrian.
Sorry.
Thanks. So yeah, just to highlight that we're an interdisciplinary team, and although we haven't come at it as mental health experts, we quickly realised that the importance of wellbeing that a project like this can bring. And that well-being, that cohesion, those intergenerational links on an individual level, on a family level, and on a societal level can be really empowering. But that obviously does need partners on the ground. And I know Anna wanted to talk to everyone about the importance of embedding well-being into existing programmes.
I'm Anna Medilla from the University of Leeds, and I'm really sorry that I missed Raghu and most of Adrian and Karina's presentations. But I'm delighted to be able to introduce Dr. Beverly Costa, and maybe I could just say one little thing that I've been working with Adrian and Karina. We are together in a seed-funded challenge cluster on mainstreaming global mental health. So I kind of know a little bit of what they were all saying, but I've only just met Beverly over the last week or two, so I'm very much looking forward to getting new insights from Dr. Beverly Costa. Dr. Costa is Senior Practitioner Fellow from Birkbeck, University of London, and we were really keen to have a practitioner in this panel was talking about mental health, really wanted to get insight from somebody who's working on the ground and creating a new service for people in this space. So very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say, Beverly.
So it's a pleasure to be here today to share my thinking about multilingual heritage, mental health and psychological therapies. I'm going to start with a quotation from Jacques Derrida. I speak only one language and it is not my own. Well, that was my own experience too. I spoke only one language when I was growing up, and that language was the mother tongue of neither of my parents. It was English. I spoke all my life to members of my family in a language that wasn't their own. It wasn't the language of their home or of their heart. The languages we use and the languages we lose are a very important part of human heritage. They're passed on or they are lost across the generations. And for people who've migrated, their languages, according to Joshua Fishman, can be the primary home for those who may have no other they can call their own. And we've just been looking at the work of Adrian and Karina and people who are displaced and how their heritage is their home in a way, even though they've moved away from it. And the language is very much a part of that. Now, when we think about language, it's often simpler to focus on the technical aspects of language, and people really focus on, is there a word for such and such a concept in this language, or how do you translate one thing from one language to another? And that is, of course, important. But our linguistic identities hold other, more intangible knowledge and experiences at the embodied and psychic levels. So Nelson Mandela said that if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. And if you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. When I was training as a psychotherapist in the 1990s, I was really surprised that there was no attention given to multilingualism in my training, given that the head and the heart are our major preoccupation. Psychological therapy modules are rooted in a monolingual ideology, and monolingualism, like whiteness and people racialized as white, is considered the default. But people's multilingual identities are a resource for improved mental health and well-being. Their languages are not an obstacle. When I finished my training, I looked around for a service that could fill the gap that I'd observed in therapy and counselling for multilingual people, and I couldn't find one. So in 2000, I set up an organisation called Mother Tongue Multi-Ethnic Counselling Service. And this service offered counselling and therapy that was culturally and linguistically sensitive to people from the Black and minority ethnic communities, and that included people from an asylum-seeking and refugee and trafficked background, and we offered it in people's preferred languages. And although our therapy was offered in a range of languages directly, so the therapists who worked for us could all speak and all work in more than one language, in order to really be an accessible service and to offer the service to as many people as possible, we needed to work through interpreters. And so we formed our own mental health interpreting service, and we trained interpreters in how to work effectively in a therapeutic context. And the interpreters, together with ourselves, we trained ourselves as practitioners in how to do that as well. And then in 2018, we did what we'd planned since the very beginning when I set up Mother Tongue, which was to move Mother Tongue from being a very small, niche, very good service, we thought and we hoped, into the mainstream, into the NHS. And so the interpreter service was integrated into the local NHS service together with our Mother Tongue mental health therapy model. And what we wanted to then do was to share as much of our learning and our experience as possible. And so we continued with our research into multilingualism and therapy in collaboration with Professor Jean-Marc Val. We developed training and supervision programs so that we could share our learning with other therapists. And we moved from being a frontline service, that's what Mother Tongue was, to being a new service called Pásalo. And Pásalo is Spanish for pass it on. And that's exactly what we're trying to do now, is to pass on and disseminate as much as possible the learning from our frontline service via training, research and creative projects. And we also, within our work, we've set up a bilingual forum for anybody who is interested in these issues. And I'm just going to tell you about the next forum meeting. It's on April the 13th. The forum meetings are completely free. But the reason I'm mentioning it to you is because the theme of the next meeting is, I think, particularly relevant to this session that we're having today. And the theme is the languages we use and the languages we lose. And if you would like to register your interest in terms of attending, then just email me at the email address at the bottom of this slide. Now, I've used myself as the starting point for this session and the work, rather than starting with other people, because I've tried to learn from that experience of my own and my family's linguistic heritages. And then during 18 years of frontline work, Mother Tongue worked with over 2,000 clients. And so we learned through that experience of frontline practice with our clients, which we then validated through formal research conducted together with Professor Jean-Marc Deval from Birkbeck, the University of London. So I'm just going to pause for a moment because I'm assuming that you can hear me and that everything's going okay. But if there is any problem at all, perhaps somebody could let me know just now. Okay, great. So the work that we did with Professor Jean-Marc Deval, we learned from that multilingual clients are different from monolingual clients, that they feel that they have a different identity in each of their languages, and that they may express different emotions in their different languages, that they can process trauma more effectively in one or other of their languages, and they may only remember early memories. And we've just heard in Raghu and Adrian and Karina's talks just how important memories are, and that people may only remember their early languages in the language in which they were encoded. So from that learning, this is our recommendation. That training to work with multilingual clients and training as multilingual practitioners needs to be included in the core curricula for all mental health practitioners. The training needs to be rooted in practice to fill the gap between conceptual ideas about culture and language and their practical application. Many practitioners feel ideologically very committed to concepts, but the gap is, what do you do with those concepts when you're working with people in the moment? And the gap is then what training needs to address, because training needs to build practitioners' confidence, and it needs to include how to create a linguistically empathic space where all of people's languages are welcome. How can a mental health practitioner feel confident to work with an interpreter? How can multilingualism be viewed as a potential therapeutic asset rather than a problem or something to be ignored? Now, so far, it's been impossible to convince policymakers to include the multilingual experience in their training curricula for mental health practitioners. So in 2020, with a grant from the Paul Hamlin Foundation, Pásalo created a free online training resource on mental health and multilingualism. Now, we made it free because it was hard enough to convince people that this was a really important area of training. And so we wanted to reduce all the barriers possible. And we made it also because professionally framed practice just doesn't change on its own. You know, it's all very well talking about it, but people have to have some kind of guidance about what to do when they're working with people. So I'm going to show you an example of the training resource. It addresses working effectively with an interpreter, linguistic justice, linguistic identity, trauma and language, and linguistic empathy. And this is the first page of the course. It's the introductory page, and the course has 10 units in it. Now, what I'm now going to do is to play a trailer of a film that we made last year, and the film's called Language of the Heart. And this training resource is based around that film. And the film tells the story of a trainee therapist and the challenges he faces trying to work effectively with multilingual clients when he's had no training to prepare him. The course is free and it's certificated, and we would love it if you would give it a try. What I'm going to do now is just show you the trailer for the film. Now, the film is a 30-minute film, but in the resource, it's chunked down for each of the different sections. So we're just going to see a trailer of the whole film now.
I just want to say one thing before we get started. Everything that everybody says in the room will be interpreted so we can all understand. Is that okay?
I wish I could speak English like you, like a native.
مثل ما بتعرفي عادة بجتمع مع ابنك فايق لوحده. بحب أوضح شغلة واحدة بس قبل ما نبلش. كل شيء رح ينحكى بهالاجتماع من حيالله شخص رح يكون عم يترجم حتى الكل يفهم. هل هالشيء واضح؟
My client started shouting at me. Sure, she was swearing at me.
Come on, it couldn't have been that bad. Maybe it just sounded worse because it was in Polish.
Anyway, where do you expect me to speak it? On the bus? Apparently, it makes some people very nervous to hear other people speaking a language that isn't English. So actually, I'm doing them a favor.
So if you want to pursue any of the issues that I've been talking about, here's the resources. As I mentioned, there's the free course, there's the free film, and there's a book that's just come out called Other Tongues, Psychological Therapies in a Multilingual World. Thank you very much.
I wanted to change the format of the rest of the session a little bit. To make the most of the time that we have. And rather than doing separate breakout rooms, we decided to keep everybody together and to have questions, comments, and discussion to the panel, but also to, I think you've got my slides, so that we can kind of have a discussion together in one group. The presentation, very short introductory presentation that I'm going to give at the beginning, actually, hopefully, a good way into this next section where we will open up comments and discussion to the floor. It's worth me mentioning that one of the reasons I'm involved in particular panel is I am a psychologist, so heritage is quite a new area to me. And I'm really interested in the idea of mainstreaming global mental health. The GCRF programme, that's the Global Challenges Research Fund, has funded us for a year to put together the framework for a mainstreaming project on global mental health. So we go into the second round. One of the things we've been doing in our seed funding phase is to understand how mental health might be embedded in development work. or more generally. Just a few slides from me to introduce us to the discussion. I'm going to just introduce why mental health and well-being is important and why it should be of interest to the heritage sector. First of all, health and well-being is SDG, so that Sustainable Development Goal 3, and mental health comes under this health. So it's an important sustainable development goal. Secondly, mental health has been historically under-prioritized and underfunded in the development sector. But it is a key UN priority alongside climate change, antimicrobial resistance, and urbanization. So mental health is key in the UN. And part of that is because of the impact of the pandemic, that the negative impact of COVID on mental health has been global and is currently a priority because of the pandemic as well. And finally, the World Health Organization recognizes mental health to be an urgent current priority. So good reasons there for why mental health should be of interest in the development sector, including heritage. Next slide, please. When we talk about mental health, my experience is that many people consider that to be a professional space. That doesn't need to be the case. And when we think of mental health in terms of psychosocial well-being, I think that helps us see it as something that we can all be concerned about and to include in development work. Psychological aspects of well-being consist of promoting a positive sense of self, promoting positive emotions, and facilitating skills development like life skills, parenting skills. These psychological aspects of well-being are maybe easier to relate to as non-professional, non-mental health professional areas that we might be able to engage with across the development sector. And the social part of psychosocial well-being, hopefully here, as people working in heritage, that this may resonate with you. So facilitating community building, preserving sociocultural identity, and supporting community mobilization. I'm sure that Adrian and Karina's work here gave you some ideas about how heritage engages with social well-being. And what I'd really love to hear your discussion, comments and questions about how the heritage sector can also engage in psychological well-being. So my final slide to get us to the discussion section. So next slide, please. Okay, so we've had our propagations from Professor Raghu Raghavan, who is an expert in mental health, Adrian and Karina, who are doing fantastic work in mental health and heritage, and Dr. Beverly Costa, who has given us a view from a practitioner view here. So rather than the breakout sessions in terms of having some discussion, questions and comments now, the kinds of things that you might want to think about and comment on is how can heritage better contribute to mental health and well-being? So think about the psychosocial impacts that your work might have. What policy change would you like to see on the topic? What kind of future research and practical actions are needed? And what can we do to improve our partnerships and collaborations on this topic? So we might want to leave that slide to give you some ideas of the kind of questions you might have and comments you might make. And now I'd like to pass you over to Francesca, because I think maybe she's clearer in describing, maybe to put your hand up if you would like to comment or ask a question to a member of the panel.
First, wanted to say thank you to all of you. I think this is a super timely topic and also very interesting to listen to all your work. I think this is really the one topic that will be big on our agenda for the next 10 years or so. So it's really good to get into this. Now, my question is because I'm always getting confused when certain notions of heritage come up, and to me, some of the way in which heritage has been referred to was a little bit too cozy, and I realize that it doesn't mean it's not appropriate, but I think there are other dimensions that should be added and that may complicate the picture quite a bit. And from my perspective, it's those dimensions that make it interesting to do more research on how all this really hangs together and what is the bigger picture here. And for me, this is connected to, I think Beverly mentioned that heritage is like people's home. And I think all of you made statements more or less like this. And although I understand how it's meant, and of course this is something positive, but for me, this is something horrible at the same time, in various respects. I mean, one is we don't know what happened in these homes. And we had a little bit of a discussion on trauma, but I think that is really significant, that there may be reasons why people want to get out of these homes. And even if it's not trauma, maybe just people want to explore the world and just have their own home somewhere else in some different way. So there's this sense of liberty that I think needs to come with any understanding of home. That's one aspect. And then we live all in societies that are very mixed. So every home differs from as on a street. Every home is different, and people do different things and come from different places and have different traditions. So how do you bring the community together when we all display so different understandings of who we are and what our well-being consists of? How do we get it together within the street, for example, or in a given neighborhood? I think that's a challenge, and that's something that is true, I think, in most parts of the world today. There's a huge diversity. And the final thing is, and there's also, it's a small group, but it's still an important group, the so-called TCKs, the third culture kids. Now, they have many homes. So where does their mental health come from? And the one question how they identify themselves, and which you must never ask, is the question, where do you come from? So the question about heritage is the worst question to ask for TCK. So how do we solve that? So, and I don't want to make your life difficult. I just think there are issues that are bigger than what we've talked about so far. And I think we need to take them on board to really understand how well-being and heritage go together. Thanks.
Beverly, is that one maybe for you to respond to first?
I'd like to have a go. Thanks, Cornelius. Really a brilliant question and observation, because you're absolutely right about the anti-cozification of these kind of activities where everybody is coming together and celebrating their heritage, and some people may not want to be celebrating their heritage at all. Of course, it depends what we mean by heritage. So one thing I would say is, Cornelius, do that course, do the online course I put online, because we address some of that on there. In that people's identities are formed of their present, their past, and their future. And for some people who want to leave their past behind for very, very good reasons, and I know Adrian and Karina said people found that there were bits from their past that they could hang on to that were very positive. Some people, there won't be anything. And they are creating their own heritage in their present and in their future. And that's their home. And that's something that needs to be really attended to. And this is why I think it is really important to have a psychological understanding when you are working with people who have been extremely traumatized. That was the first thing I wanted to say. The second thing I wanted to say about third culture kids, and in a way I kind of define myself as a third culture kid, is that I guess what I'm aiming to do with myself is to work towards something I now call authentic hybridity. So it's a mixture, it's a new form of identity, but it is authentic and it's rooted in something and it's rooted in somewhere. And I feel that, if people now want to ask me where I'm from, I have a much clearer answer than I would have done several years ago. But that's because of the work that I've put into it. And so I'm speaking from my own personal experience here, as well as from a practitioner and professional experience too. So I hope that kickstarts some of the conversation.
I just add to that, but absolutely, and I think part of it is just about using heritage as an additional tool that people can link to today. So you're right. So it's not just about the past and where they're from, but it's about where they are now and what unites them with the place they are currently in. And I think that's really, really powerful and really valuable. And that's something we're trying to do for our project too. But yeah, really interesting point, Cornelius. Thank you.
I think, yeah. So just to add, I think it's something that we worry about whilst we're doing the work, is that we're not going to create a positive effect on the community, that we could possibly be doing something that we think is going to work, but we're coming from the wrong point of view. And so, we try to gauge the impact of the work through more direct means than taking anecdotal feedback. So if the work's had an effect on the change in things like suicide rate within the camps or violence rates, and the concern is, I suppose, that you could be marginalizing people that don't want to be involved with the heritage work, and up they go to the side, and you're carrying on, and you can see these rich festivals occurring and people being involved, and unbeknownst to you, there's this whole problem that you're creating. And the way that we've tried to manage that is through our sort of ethical protocols and making sure that we're staying within a support framework and a psychosociological framework that looks around the edges for us. We've been very well supported by Mercy Corps and UNHCR in the camp. They're basically our facilitators and are in everyday contact, and I suppose, and it is still really our anecdotal feedback, because it's quite hard to get those higher level metrics on how the community has really reacted to the work. But the Mercy Corps find that they're getting better interactions from the groups, and it enables conversations with those who don't want to get involved. So it's not missing those people out, even if they don't want to get involved. They come into conversations that they weren't going to go into because of the new thing that's happening.
Well, I think heritage is integral to well-being, because I think it is part and parcel of us. It's because it is actually there. It is actually a form of intervention for us. The thing is that it doesn't have to be somewhere along the line of the trajectory of our lives and developments, both in rural and urban communities around the world. What has actually happened is that mental health has become more medicalized. And as a result of the medicalization of mental health, and I think we have the heritage and spiritual practices, belief systems, traditions, all those things which could be considered as interventions are actually eroded. And I think the global north actually thinks that taking a pill and popping a pill in your mouth is actually the solution to everything around mental health. But that is not the case. We know that because we have ample evidence of the last 100 years in terms of how the kind of the pharmaceutical interventions may or may not have worked with everybody. And I think it's important that we take into consideration the kind of a comprehensive mode of interventions. And I think it's time that we stop this deficit model of mental health, and especially some of the global mental health has actually slightly twisted now, but the global mental health crowd often talked about the fact that culture is not actually important for mental health. But now, recently, the Lancet Commission actually is slightly twisting towards the cultural model of mental health again. Because I think it's important that we actually look at a more of a strength-based model of resilience and how cultural practices, heritage can actually improve the resilience and help us to understand more about ourselves and meaning-making, which is actually the most powerful intervention of all.
Yeah, I suppose it was just really thinking about heritage as a process. And if we don't think of heritage as a collection of artifacts, but actually what heritage is a process of meaning-making and interrogation. And we think of that's what heritage is, but we use these artifacts in whatever way as the raw material of the meaning making. That therefore, it seems to me that heritage is an essential part of mental well-being. It's just part of it. That the two things are inextricably linked, just as culture is inextricably linked.
Yes, yeah. I just want to thank. Sorry, I didn't get the name for that comment. One of the main learning points that we've had from our seed-funded project on mainstreaming global mental health was how mental health can be viewed as absolutely part and parcel of what different sectors are doing. So in terms of heritage, that exactly as you've said, that well-being is not different from heritage. It's part of heritage. Well-being can be improved by heritage and is a fundamental part of we as human beings need meaning and draw meaning from our heritage. So I'm really enthused by the connection that you're so quickly make, and I'm hopeful that we can make that connection in other sectors as well, such as shelter, food security. But I think the connection there with heritage is so strong, and I'm just really encouraged by your comment. Thank you.
I can read it. So, how is heritage being defined? And sorry, let me read it and understand the question before. So basically, he or she is saying that heritage is defined and is inherently Eurocentric. So, which kind of lens are we using to look at heritage? And you're also saying that heritage has been running through value, but the value of whom? So again, I think we are raising an issue that has been tackled a lot of time during this conference about whose heritage, which kind of heritage are we looking at, which kind of lens are we using to look at heritage. And I think, and then when heritage does not assume a universal value, how do we select these things? Heritage as a feeling, as a shared understanding. So, and also moving from material manifestation of heritage into more intangible aspects. Would you like to, thanks, Karina?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. One of the things we were extremely mindful of is not coming in from the outside and imposing what we thought of as valuable. And it was very much a collaboration and a process to decide which sites were selected through a virtual reality, how the Cultural Heritage Festival would run. So it was an absolutely bottom-up process. And a part of that, we saw that, for instance, rather than the monumental sites, the sites around the marketplace of the souk or the gardens were actually as popular, if not more so, than the monumental heritage and the traditional cultural heritage. So absolutely, I think it's important that we take a step back from what we perceive of as valuable to democratize that. And I also wonder, in terms of a comment about stones being chucked away, we're in a different project in Jordan where this heritage site was being mined for its stone. And what seemed to be really valuable there was thinking about the education and thinking about the economic value and how the heritage can work for the economic good of its population rather than being seen as competing with people's livelihoods. So maybe that's in part an answer, although there'll be people here that know much more about that than I do.
Yeah, thank you. I agree with you, and if your point in relation to why some of the artifacts may not be that much more valued by some of those communities. But I think it is the sense of self, and I think it is the traditional and cultural practices that are actually more important in the well-being context as well. Because I think what is actually, I must also pinpoint the negative aspect of things, because when was the last time the World Psychiatric Movement actually talked about heritage? Because I think it is important that heritage becomes part of that professional training perspectives, because cultural psychiatry is still not being heard about in the wider context of interventions. It is still being ruled by the pharmaceutical companies in many ways. So I think it is important that heritage is ingrained in the professional training perspective to understand the wider context is not just a small thing that we should actually explore. How we actually explore culture and making people culturally sensitive and culturally competent is the key in terms of building, co-creating some of those interventions. Sometimes there are no meaningful interventions, so you have to co-create an intervention with the user. And I think none of the professionals that we actually exist at the moment are competent to actually do that. That gives you the confidence. You have the confidence to actually explore the issues with the person, not see them as problems. And I think the moment you actually see them as problems, you lose the heritage and you lose all the kind of holistic way of actually looking at that individual in terms of how we formulate or how we collectively bring together, how we collectively make meanings for those interventions. That is actually lost if you take heritage out.
I cannot agree with you more. Raghu, Anna, would you like to add anything, or anybody else?
I would only add the community-led solutions, the collaborations that Raghu stresses there is absolutely key in my mind, and I've learned that through working with Raghu and learning from Karina and Adrian's project, and also interestingly from the AMR work, which is one of the UN priorities, is community-led solutions is what's going on in that sector at the minute. And I don't think there's any other way to go about this than to actually, we don't have the solutions, but we can facilitate the community to pinpoint what they want to find solutions for as well, and what's going to be appropriate for them in their communities, and doing interviews with researchers across the different development sectors. I've been doing this last 3 months again and again and again. That's been absolutely vital, is that individual researchers have had a sensitivity to a well-being need, which then they've worked with the community to find a community-led solution, and that is the most productive, culturally appropriate way of approaching these issues. And as Raghu says, not to see it always as a problem, but to see these as opportunities.
Okay, so I think now we have another couple of questions. So one from Grace Conium, and I would like to ask her to ask the question directly.
Okay, lovely. I just want to say thank you. It's a really interesting conversation so far. I just had one question kind of stemming from a comment made by Raghu regarding the stigma surrounding mental health. And I'm wondering if that's anything maybe some of the practitioners have faced, and maybe the steps if any, that they took to overcome that stigma?
I think the stigma is actually, and I mentioned that, I think in that kind of tribal, we work with tribal communities and some of the rural communities. And through, especially in the tribal community, we had this theater show. We talked about theater, some of the issues surrounding that. And I think what we could actually see the next day, and many people who had this, who were not actually seeking any help, they were actually seeking help the next day. And I think I mentioned they're actually going to see the general practitioner. So it was engaging with the community was actually very important. And I think this is not reported by me. This is actually reported by the NGO, in the sense that the NGO has been struggling to get these people to actually seek help with the general practitioner in terms of some of the mental health issues. But now, because of the play, because of the fact of engagement, because of the fact that that they could actually see that this is an issue that I need to actually address, and they were actually able to go and seek help. And I think that still continues a year on. So I think it is a way of actually eradicating the stigma, directly talking about mental health with the communities, engaging with the communities, and enabling them to hear what their issues are, and finding a way of actually how we communicate that to them in terms of how to seek help is actually very important.
The way that we've dealt with that is basically not talking about these sorts of things at all, even to the length that when we've done the program work in the camp, we've not really spoken about the underlying rationale for what we're doing at all. We're talking about bringing people together and talking about heritage and trying to create something and working towards a festival. And we don't mention the fact that the reason we're doing this is because there's these personal security issues and there's these mental health issues and there's these cohesion issues. It's completely unspoken. So if there is any stigma around those topics, they're avoided by being known but not spoken about. Yeah, that's the approach that we've taken. Whether that's right or wrong, I guess some could see it as being unethical if you're going and treating a population as a group and giving them a treatment without talking about the fact that you're giving them a treatment. But we're not thinking about our work in that way at all anyway. So hopefully that avoids it.
Can I say something, Francesca? So we went about it in a slightly different way, and also we're based in the UK. And I suppose we went about it thinking about it in a very kind of 360 degrees way. So it wasn't just about, well, how are we going to make an intervention and make things better here? It was, how is it going to work all the way through? So we adopted an approach that I call going round the houses and a byproducts approach. To give you a couple of examples, we set up a knitting group within the organisation. So some people came to use the knitting group who'd already had some counselling for us, and they just wanted to continue their attachment to the organisation and be together with other people. And other people came and joined the knitting group who didn't really want to have any kind of official intervention at all. But what happened from that is that they might then pass the word around to other people that they knew who were having difficulties and say, this is an organisation you can trust. We've been there, they seem okay, why don't you give it a go? So that was one intervention. And we then had, with it, we were actually a counselling organisation. So if somebody needed then some support, we were there ready for them. They could go out of the knitting room into the office to Kim with her big appointments book and book an appointment. And another way that we did it was by providing English language classes within what was actually predominantly a mental health organisation. And I have, so many people have asked me, how did we engage with people and how did we get over stigma? And I have said to them so many times, put on an English language course, but it doesn't compute for some people. They can't imagine that you would be able to justify putting on an English language course within a mental health group. But that, of course, served the function of bringing in people without any mental health label at all. But then they were in the environment where they got to get a sense of who we were and how they could trust us, and how they would either be able to access and use the services for themselves, or that they would then pass the word around to people who were their family and friends. So it was a kind of like a byproduct approach.
I'm glad you spoke first, Beverly. I want to kind of build on that and add to it that one of the most interviews I did recently that had the big impact on me was actually in Spanish, and the lady's son translated for me. I have nothing but English. And what this wonderful lady was doing was working with my migrant children who'd only maybe spent a few days in a camp going through, and she would work with them storybooks, picture books, and the picture books were selected to touch on but not push possibly difficult topics, so that the kids could engage with the books on different levels, and if they felt ready to use it to start a conversation about a difficult topic, they could. But if they weren't ready, they didn't need to. And also with migrant women, and I remember she was working with we laughed at that. There was a folk tale about a human woman who married some kind of spirit husband, and there was a way that she could get rid of the spirit husband. And it's a folk tale, but it allowed the women to start talking about the difficulties that they had in their relationship with their husband, and the domestic violence issues and control issues that they sometimes were subjected to. But they were able to do this within the context of a clear folktale with a non-human partner. In the folktale, the woman was trying magical ways to get rid of. But I think these oblique ways of using stories, theatre, heritage in the stories and narratives that people have that can allow stigmatized topics to be raised if people are ready to talk about them are really, really, really valuable.
Thank you once again. And Beverly, there is another question for you. About linguistic heritage. So Esther is wondering about the long-term mental health and well-being impacts of losing your facility in your mother tongue, for example, in East African contexts, where English becomes dominant once people go to school and university, and if they have friends and partners who don't share their first language, they may lose their ability to use it effectively.
Yeah. Well, where do I start with that? I mean, it's such a big question. I'll say again, there's a bit about that in the film and in the course, if you want to look at it, because of course, English has it has such global dominance. It's what we could say is the ultimate prestige language. So clearly, you can understand why people want to learn English, because it opens the door to commerce and academia, but at the same time, it means that other languages are being suppressed and are being lost. And in the I won't do a spoiler on the film, but one of the clients has some very disturbing things to say about his relationship with his home minority language. So it is a real issue, because it's how it is people's sense of home, their languages, and so I guess that there's the sense of what you've lost, what you may never have had, whether you then end up speaking your home language really badly, and then the people around you are judging you for not being able to speak your home language adequately. So there are all kinds of issues around that. And just add in a tiny little thing that may be of interest to people, is that a recent experiment was done with 5 and 6-year-old children. This is slightly off topic, but I hope I can bring it back because I just think it's so fascinating. With 5 or 6-year-old children who were shown little videos of other children. And the aim of the experiment was for them to choose which of the children in the videos they would choose to be in their friendship groups. And the children chose, almost unanimously, they chose each time children who sounded like them, who had the same accent as them, not children who looked like them, which is what the experimenters assumed would have been the choice. And so language as a form of relation, how we make relationships, how we attach to people, how we judge people, how we include or we exclude, it's just fundamental. And we don't attend to it because it's kind of like the air we breathe. You know, it is an intangible. It's not a monument. It's not a mask. It's just this thing, and we don't attend to it. And yet it is so important. I'll stop there.
Does anybody else want to add anything? There was also a question from, let me check, Daniel Taylor asking, how do we consider intangible and oral heritage when speaking about well-being? So I think you have already kind of answered this question too. Nobody else? And Liana Katsamnikov, yes, would you like to ask your question? You have been waiting for a while.
Yeah. No, I would like to say that I think it's very important to create the space for all the cultural aspects, and especially heritage, also to create the space for that part of mental health, which is a very serious problem. And I think it has to, if culture wants to fulfill its humanitarian purpose, has to take into consideration that part, which has to do a lot, I think, in globally, it's where we have different reasons about the mental health or problems with the well-being, but especially I think for the West world, it has much to do with the identity. I think that is the last century, and especially the last 20 years, with so much information and so much pressure. This can, I think this affects very much the reasons, one of the reasons maybe for the mental health. I'm not a specialist, but I can assume and I can understand from myself also that it has to do a lot with the identity and the purpose. And maybe the heritages can play a role as a pole of bringing together the communities around the heritage, even if it's a long conversation. All the questions that I have already been asked, and they are very crucial. What is heritage? If it's a very personal thing, but I think even if the space is created for that, it will help to recognize in a different way also what's the purpose of the culture, because I think that the purpose of the culture has changed during the last 50 years, and if it wants to serve a target, if it wants to be really important in the moment, has to take into consideration that thing. And I believe that initiatives like as Mrs. Beverly Costa have already said about England are already important. But it could be also, it's very important to be researched about the ways that can be sensibilization of the public about that, bringing together as whole communities or people for sharing and providing help for these problems. So is not so also the stigma can be reduced in these days. And I think if this technology and the technology as it is, and all this kind of huge input and mega data that we are in, will continue to disorient people and the high rhythms of our life, of course. But I'm very glad to see. I'm an engineer. I have I work in conservation of monuments and sites, but this is, I think, a topic of the moment. It's not something that, yeah, it's something that is needed now. And yeah, yes. Thank you.
But maybe I could, Adrian and Karina, I don't want to put you on the spot, but I wonder whether there's resonances with the work that you're doing in terms of preserving destroyed heritage in a virtual environment. And maybe I could ask you to respond in terms of identity impacts on that, or kind of maybe just some reflections on the work that you're doing and people's identity.
I think Karina wants to say something, but just before she does, one point that's worth considering in this context is an issue that we came across in the, obviously these people have been displaced from Syria because of war there, and there's been a lot of destruction, and terrorists specifically targeting heritage sites for destruction. The Temple of Bel at Palmyra being a really good example of that, blown up in 2016, and we've recreated that site from very old tourist photography that you can scrape from the net or can be donated from people. One of our other research projects we're led by Andy Wilson, and the issue that obviously comes up there is that we're showing people something that as if it exists when it doesn't, and it obviously that comes into the conversation, and so there's that can be quite distressing. You know, the idea that we're showing the souk in Aleppo or one of the old mosques that's being blown up, and people asking about, is it still there? Is it, what does the place look like now? It can get into very difficult conversations quite quickly, and we've the very hard end to that in some places. That some of the communities that we've worked with are from places in Syria that weren't on the tourist radar, and don't have a lot of photography. So there's no easy way to scrape the web in the way that we do to create reconstructions of those. And the end result of that is that the events that we run, some of the people that are there can be underrepresented in that virtual world because we're not unable to allow them to share those spaces. And to the point where one of the towns, we've just had a couple of photographs of what clearly was a very beautiful mosque that they wanted to show off to people, and it could be quite challenging. At the other end, there's people that are really excited about the fact that we're able to, where we have been able to. It's not really conservation because these are just digital analogs, but in some way recreate or keep these places in that sphere provides positive feeling beyond what we're doing already. And then the one other element to that is that it's some people that from these big towns, these sites that tourists go to, that we recreate these huge heritage sites that they want to share. Sometimes they live in those towns, but they're far enough away from them that they haven't been able to visit them themselves. So being able to ask to go and see that place, that if it wasn't a war zone, one day they'd like to have taken their family, and they're able to do that from a camp. It's pretty neat for them, and it's pretty neat for us, So yeah, there's all sides to this.
And Karina, would you like to add anything? I saw you were also talking about intangible heritage before. Maybe you would like to add something.
Oh no, I think Adrian's covered it. But yeah, just for the importance of the intangible and the non-monumental. I think it relates to my comment before that's still too long. And the non-monumental in just what's valuable and important to people. And yeah, it is some kind of tough decisions about kind of what you're able to show and put resource into. And I think in an ideal world, you'd have bigger projects that could make sure everyone was represented. Oh, sorry, Beverly, but yeah.
Sorry, thank you. It's just, I think there's I'm surprised the word power hasn't come up in this whole session, really, in this whole conversation, because just that, and I think it's a very honest account that Adrian and Karina have just given. It is about, who's got the power, who makes the selections, who gets to have the special video made and who doesn't. And these kind of issues, I mean, I know we talk about and co-creation and co-production, but I think there needs to be a really thorough interrogation of actually power dynamics, because just saying co doesn't mean it is co. So it's just an added bit to put in.
Yeah, absolutely agree.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I say something on the power dynamics here, if I may. I think it's important that, especially when our work with the tribal communities has been very important, because obviously they had the heritage and the tradition, they had agriculture, they had a livelihood, and there are a lot of things that they actually had. And the powerful people have actually taken everything from them, taken their land, taken their livelihood, and taken their heritage, and made them alcoholics. And you label them as people with mental illness. So whose responsibility is that?
I'm happy that the issue of power came out also from this session, because we have been discussing a lot power dynamics in the previous session. So this was really a surprise that we had to wait until the end of this session for that issue. So I think we have time for a last question from Clara Arokiazami. Sorry for the wrong pronunciation of your name. So could you unmute yourself and ask the question?
Yes, some of this conversation takes me back to the 80s, where you have English classes and knitting circles. We need to come back to modern days today. Maybe culture and mental health could be explored under the following headings. Individual and groups' beliefs about mental health is culturally defined. Experiencing violence because of one's cultural heritage is quite critical. That happens on a daily basis. Racism and discrimination based on cultural difference. We've seen so many case laws around it. So those are the critical issues on a daily basis that impacts on our heritage, our culture, and our mental health. And that cuts across all nationalities, all groups. It's not just about migrants, and all religious groups.
Can I just comment that one of the things that's come up in our student-funded work is around concepts of mental health and psychosocial well-being, and those are just two ways in. But there's a lot of work to be done on what concepts to use and when, and how to use culturally appropriate concepts. And I'm really, really grateful to you for turning it around and giving me a lot of food for thought in terms of thinking of mental health. And I'm struggling with the words, even just like mental health concept, the narratives of mental health, the meanings of mental health, and I'm not even wanting to use the phrase mental health as culture, and I think or as heritage, and that's going to give me a lot of things to think about. Thank you.
There was one point that on the topic of power that's interesting. And if Owen Green from our project was here, he'd probably speak about this. In the camp, the structures within the society become they go to their extremes, and so there are some serious power imbalances created within the community. Well, the camp structure's got its own power structure, but within the community itself, there's some quite interesting power dynamics. One of the things that we noticed was the way in which the sort of conservative agendas had grown within the group. So to the point where the camp hadn't created any spaces to allow certain types of cultural activities to occur. In particular, the women there hadn't been given any space to carry out any of their cultural practices that they'd normally do in private amongst women. And this came out as we were doing our project work, and it was one of the cultural event we worked. It was one of the first times. It was the first time in camp that a separate space had been created for the women to be able to do some of those, for want of a better word, ritual activities. You know, getting together and dancing and doing some singing in a private space where they could just, you know, open up a little bit, and obviously with their children for the first time. And Karina managed, you know, obviously was great in driving that, because she could be in the room and seeing what's going on. Do you want to talk about that, Karina?
Oh yeah, I guess it's just one of the most moving parts of the project was that creating that space. But it was also tragic as well, the fact that it took this cultural heritage event for that to be created, and that didn't happen anyway. So it kind of left it's really valuable it happened, but it was also tragic that we had to instigate that. That shouldn't have been the case. And so it's that, I guess the mark of success is when you're not needed. And so to create those events going forward, I think as a lasting legacy is kind of really valuable.
We're not just only talking about the migrant communities or the adult communities. We have children who are born and brought up here who have bicultural heritage, tricultural heritage. In London, around the dinner table, I was listening to Radio 4, several languages are spoken at one dinner event. So how are we facilitating that cultural need and mental health? And children, you know, they have an extra baggage to carry with them. Very little attention is paid to that. So we need to look at culture right across the age groups, and they have different needs as well. It's not just a universal description or problem that needs investigation.
Can I come in here and say, I think that question is probably a good one to end on. We do finish, but I don't want you to feel that question hasn't been responded to. But I actually feel that is just a major question that we will spend a lifetime trying to respond to. If one of our panelists would like to give a 10-second response, I'm really happy. I think it would be good to have a quick response before we finish.
Can I just mention something here in terms of I think in terms of the cultural context and mental health, we haven't started at all, really. Because I think the cultural perceptions and how culture is actually playing a major role in both in the well-being and also in terms of solutions finding for mental illness. We have only just started. And I think it is important that I think we can't just talk about within the heritage circles alone. I think you need to have the wider professional angle and collectively working towards it, and not actually opposing it to each other. Because one group of mental health professionals saying that there is no role of culture in mental health, and one group actually actively saying that there is culture all the way around. But I think I can see the point in both camps. But I think it's important that we work together, because there is no one solution fits everybody. I think that's what we are trying to do with the global mental health, that one solution fits everybody. But that is not the case at all. We know that. We have ample examples of this from communities, from cultures, from narratives from people and users and the families as well. So I think it's have to be various solutions and building solutions with the communities, with cultural angles and cultural heritage angles is the only way I think that we can move forward. As to what shape or form it might actually take, that very much different. Very strong various cultural context and global and country-specific context.
I'm really pleased to give you the last word on that, Raghu, with huge respect for your experience and expertise on that. Thank you. And to all our panelists, again, my apologies for the technical problems, and huge thank you to Francesca for doing a lot of the facilitating. I couldn't have done it without you. And to thank everybody who joined us today. I've learned so much, and I'm really looking forward to the final session. I will try and distill some of the key points to take to the final session tomorrow. And I hope that many of you can join us for that session. And I'll pass over to Francesca just for the final comments. But thank you, Francesca.
Thanks to you, Anna. Actually, I will pass again the word to Tilly because I think you have already seen my face on the screen for a lot today. So I think it's time to pass the word to my colleague from UKNC for UNESCO, who is co-organizing this conference with me. So thank you, everybody. I take this moment to thank you once again.
Yeah, thanks, Francesca. Thanks, Anna. It's been a great conversation. Really appreciate everyone turning up. And sticking it through with the mild technical issues. I think we really managed to have some fabulous discussions, all things considering. It's been really interesting. And the chat is really popping as well, so it's really great. This is really just a reminder to say that this is not the end of the conference yet. We have one more day, and tomorrow we'll be doing a session in the morning on evaluating the impacts of heritage for the Sustainable Development Goals. And I think this will be a really, really key session for a lot of people because it's a really cross-cutting theme and it'll apply to all the sessions we've had so far. So I think it's a really great way to come together and end on a really applicable topic. And we'll also be having our closing session tomorrow where, as Anna's mentioned, various people from various sessions will be coming together to raise key findings, talk about what we've had, and then we'll have another chance for a Q&A. So if you have any burning questions that weren't answered today, hold on to them and bring them tomorrow. And that will be chaired by Stuart Taberner, who is present on this call and is the practice PI. But yes, so essentially, without taking too much more of your time, just wanted to say thank you so much for attending. You guys have really made this very special conference, and it's very great to have you all here. And all the recordings for colleagues and friends who have missed sessions will be online. And all that's left to say really is take care, and we'll hopefully see you all tomorrow. So thank you to our panelists, our tech team, Francesca, Anna especially. And yeah, take care everyone, and we'll see you soon.